Hey there, I am back with a best of video, and today we're looking at the 12 decks of the King's Wild Shorts series. Now, King's Wild Shorts is the premier subscription service from King's Wild project and designer Jackson Robinson, and it's a chance to really get into the mind of one of the most creative designers out there. Jackson Robinson does a completely different and inspired deck for every single month of the year, all the way from the first deck in January, the 2020 deck, to the final deck, Beowulf, in December. And they are some really fun and inspired decks all the way throughout. I love seeing the creativity that goes into each one, but with with finishing up my first full year as a subscriber, wanted to take a look back and see which ones really rose above the others. So I'm gonna rank all these from 12 to 1 and let you guys know what my favorite King's Wild Shorts decks were in 2020. So let's get started. My least favorite deck of the year was the first one, the January deck with 2020. Now, this deck was inspired by the actual eye chart that you see at the eye doctor, which is a bizarre inspiration to pull in for a deck. But I thought the standard tuck case was actually really nice. That white matte cardstock with the subtle embossing and holographic foil has a really ethereal look, and one that looks really great when you turn this in the light. The limited version of the tuck I didn't think was as successful. I appreciate the ambition of going with something really off the wall with a completely clear tuck case, but it had a little bit of a cheaper feel to me overall. Didn't work quite as well. Now for the cards, I'm not a big fan of words on the back of a card. And so when you put the literal eye chart on the back of the cards, it really just ends up being a distracting cluster of text in my mind. I like the fact that he went with a marked back design, although I don't think the deck was really all that suited for Magic to begin with, so the marked backs didn't really add anything to the functionality of the deck. And then as you get into the cards, it was these indices with the descending sizes on there, meant to mimic the eye chart, that really ended up contributing to a really busy and distracting feel of the deck overall. Now, while I liked the bold colors and the whimsical look of the court cards, it wasn't enough to keep this deck from being my least favorite of the year. So while I think it was a great conceptual idea and I love the experimentation, really appreciate that about King's Wild, definitely had lots of decks ahead of this one on my list. So let's move along. May's Summer Solstice deck is number 11 on my list. Now this is actually a continuation. You had the two Equinox decks that came out in previous years, and that's followed up by the two Solstice decks. This was the first of the two that came out in 2020. Now, this one looks at the Summer Solstice as its inspiration, and the standard tuck is fairly plain, really just that red with very subtle red foil on it. It's a clean look to it overall, but I would like something a little bit more to amp this one up. Now that definitely is delivered with the limited version of the tuck, with that full foiled look and that beautiful wallpaper sort of design. So I thought that did quite a bit better. The cards themselves are really elegant, really nice. I am a fan of this borderless back design for sure. These look great in a fan. And the cards themselves are, I'll say, fairly close to standard. Not a whole lot of customization to them. And I do like the clean look to these court cards overall. I actually think the recoloring is a really interesting mix with that olive color and the yellow. My issue with this deck was it didn't really go heavy on the theme. I didn't feel summer much in this deck. And so for a series of decks that was going after the seasons, I would have liked this to feel more summery. I don't know what that would have been. Maybe brighter colors or something along those lines would have helped this deck fit the theme a little bit better and kind of driven it higher up on the list for me. But as it is, this one's my number 11 deck. This is going to sound a little bit weird since I made the list, but I was surprised to see that this one turned up at number 10 on my list. The Don't Tread on Me deck, or the Gadsden deck as it may also be called, is inspired by the famous Don't Tread on Me flag that features the rattlesnake coiled up ready to strike. It's a great historical inspiration for the deck, and I thought the tuck case with its super subtle embossing and that gold metallic ink on it really turned out an elegant look overall. The snakes look great coiled on the back. It really is a great color scheme. Both the green and then the limited yellow decks look outstanding. I thought they turned out great. As you get into the cards, I like these as well. I like the extra card you get with the flag itself there. And the back design with the metallic gold inks really pops out. It's a symmetrical design that still works really well, I think. And the court cards are all nicely recolored. Now, my issue with this, honestly, is I'm just a fan of more custom decks, and I wish, I would have liked maybe some custom courts, higher customization, rather than sort of a recolor of Jackson Robinson's standard court cards. So I don't fault it. I think it makes this a nice, easily functional deck, but for me, it just left it as a slightly less memorable design overall for me. So Don't Tread on Me ends up at number 10. April's El Toro deck is number 9, and I really like this deck. It's inspired by vintage mezcal bottles, similar to tequila that you'll find down in Mexico, and it features a really clean and simple look overall. The matte tuck case lends a little bit of a sense of elegance to this overall, helps elevate the feel of this relatively plain tuck case, and subtle things like this, just this simple stripe of red, really gives such a huge pop of color. I like both the standard and the limited versions of the tuck. I thought they both turned out great. The cards themselves are also really clean and kind of fit that vintage aesthetic. I've said before that I'm not a huge fan of words on the back designs of the cards, so this is a little bit distracting to me, but I love the red with this bull silhouette on there. The court cards as well are really fun. They're definitely crammed in there with the large borders down the side, but they feature this really hand-drawn style that I can really appreciate and get behind. So I loved how well the theme was carried through this deck, and while still keeping a really nice functional deck of cards. So great clean aesthetic to this one overall, and despite the fact that it's number 9 on my list, still one that I am a big fan of. We just had a lot of great decks this year, so let's keep moving. June brought the vintage ticket-inspired general admission deck. And where we had relatively simple color schemes in the last one, this one is a complete explosion of colors. Vintage tickets often came in lots of different colors. One ticket might be in multiple colors, and this one captures that beautifully. Now, the tuck case is relatively standard, almost a cheap feeling tuck case by King's Wild standards, with its just regular glossy finish. One of the detractors on it, but I thought the artwork on this was really great. And the huge explosion of color that you get on the cards themselves, every single one with just tons of vibrant colors, really sold the deck for me. I'm a big fan of these, I'll call them one-way, two-way court cards. So you have the full body one-way court, but then it's replicated on the other side to form a two-way design. A big fan of that art on those, and the back designs really deliver on that color as well, kind of matching the aesthetic that you would find on an old ticket. So I thought that the only real detractor on this was the sort of lackluster finish on the tuck cases. Had these maybe been in a matte finish or featured a little bit of embossing to just amp that up a little, this one probably would have been a lot higher on my list. But let's keep going with the next one. October featured a really fitting design with the Haunted 8 deck that shows up at number 7 on my countdown. Now this is actually a remake of one of the original first King's Wild Shorts decks. In the very first year in October, he did the first Haunted 8 deck, and it remains one of the classic decks in the King's Wild line. But this remake really amps up the shine, featuring lots of shine and foil on the tuck case itself, as well as foil added to the back design of the cards. That silver really glows and gives an elegant feel to the cards overall. But the one misstep for me, I thought that was just too much foil. For a deck that really, I think, is meant to have a little bit darker of a feel to it overall, that silver glowing in the light almost ended up detracting from that for me. So I think lots of fun illustrations on these, but ones, if you have the original deck, you've seen before. So I just, probably could have done with less foil or no foil on a remake and been just as happy with this deck. My only detractor on this one, but still a big fan of this. And as somebody who missed out on the original Haunted 8 deck, really glad that I got a chance to see the new version brought to life. But that's number 7 on my list, so let's get into the top half. Now, February was a celebration of the 80s with the 1982 deck, or the VHS deck, whichever one you want to call it. Now, both the standard black and white and then that classic vintage yellow limited edition of the Tuck are inspired by the classic VHSs. And these Tuck cases look like they could have been ripped off of the shelves of like a Circuit City back in the day. I am a child of the 80s myself and a huge fan of what Jackson did on these. I love the Tuck cases, even though they're just regular glossy finish. That side opening, just like you'd find on a VHS cassette tape, really captured the feel of the 80s for me. And then you go to the cards themselves with back designs that are meant to mimic VHS tapes themselves, and a really cool flip effect. You'll see the tape there actually spools up as you flip through the deck. Really cool effects overall. But what really stood out was the Miami Vice style hollow foiling on the cards themselves. I love what he captured on these, and really just that crazy, zany, colorful style of the 80s on these. So really big fan of these. It's only a testament to how great this year is that these only came in at number 6 on my list. But if you haven't picked up the 1982 deck for yourself, can't recommend it enough. July brought the next installation in Jackson Robinson's sort of sub-series, the War series, and that's the Peter Flash deck. Don't let the relatively simple looking Tuck case fool you. It's a black and white feel, but I love that it's inspired by an actual vintage War deck. It's a great testament to one of the legendary planes from World War II, the P-51 Mustang. And with that inspiration, I like the vintage feel that he captured on the Tucks overall. Both the white and then the limited red edition look great in their own way, and the artwork on it is really detailed and ornate. But the cards themselves make up for the color that maybe you don't see on the Tucks themselves. Beautiful pops of color to accent these vintage inspired cards. And then on the faces of the cards, you get great multicolored borders, beautifully recolored quartz to match each one of the suits, and one of the best pairs of jokers that you will ever see. So there's a ton to like on this one. The war theme overall is captured beautifully. It's really just a kind of boring by King's Wild Project standards Tuck case that, even though it's inspired by vintage, and I like that he kind of went with that theme, is the one thing that holds us back from being a truly great deck. But don't let that hold you back, because if you get kind of caught up in a boring Tuck case, you're going to miss out on a great deck of cards. So that's Peter Flash. All right, the November deck was the Winter Solstice. Now, you may remember that number 11 was the Summer Solstice, and I said that didn't really capture summer very much for me. The Winter Solstice is pretty much the opposite. It features the same really clean aesthetic, but the mixture of the pure white tuck case with that hollow foil just captures winter and its clean white snow so beautifully. And this limited edition tuck case with the heavy use of the hollow foil kind of fits in well with the theme, but still maintains the crystals of ice that you'd see within any winter scene. So I thought this really did a much better job of capturing winter overall, and the back designs didn't disappoint. That hollow foil is put to outstanding use to mimic what you'd see in ice crystals or snowflakes in the middle of winter. The court cards here are really similar to what we saw overall with the summer deck and some of the other ones, but those accents of the hollow foil really help to set this off. So while it's basically the same designs in a lot of ways from the summer deck, the fact that the color scheme and the feel to it overall really captured the theme significantly better elevates this one a lot higher on my list. And I'll give a nod to, despite the fact that these are full foiled, these handle actually surprisingly well. So kudos on that. Definitely a thicker deck, not the best handling in the world, but really a testament to some of the experimentation with handling and foiling that Jackson had been doing throughout the year. So that's my number 4 deck, but let's get into the top 3. My top 3 starts off with the March deck, Postage Paid. This one is really simple on its face. The tuck case is designed to look like an envelope, complete with the canceled stamp on the top. Opens up just like an envelope, a little bit hard to get there, but opens up just like a classic envelope and allows you to get at the cards inside. So a really creative, nice feel to the tuck case overall. And the postage stamp style back design, really interesting, really nice, captures that vintage feel nicely. But what really makes this cool is these postmarks and the written addresses that you're going to see on the cards themselves. Now, what he did on these is he took the actual, home states and names of some of the actual subscribers of King's Wild Project and featured them on many of the cards. It was an amazing touch and a really cool way to work in some of his subscribers and give them a personal touch to the deck, all while maintaining a really beautiful and still functional deck. So the touch of adding those addresses and that personal touch on the cards themselves really gave this one an amazingly creative feel and elevated this deck all the way into my top 3. So that's Postage Paid at number 3. If you watch my top 10 decks of 2020, you probably already know which 2 decks made my top 2 because both of these were in my top 10 for the entire year. At number 2, it's Beowulf. This is one of the 2 book-themed decks that Jackson did this year, and it is a stunning achievement overall. Both the standard and the limited version have tucks that are designed to look like books. I actually like the standard one a little bit better just because I like the name being on the front of the book, but they're beautifully done. They open up kind of like a book, and the cards themselves are really impressive. They're inspired by the wood carvings that you'd find in churches in the area, and the story of Beowulf is really beautifully told in the court cards. There's Beowulf himself on the King of Spades, holding the arm of Grendel in his hands, and it's just beautifully done. The accents of foil look great, the wood carvings captured perfectly, and it features a truly outstanding diptych joker featuring the battle of Beowulf with the dragon. So really great deck of cards, tells an amazing story, and is one that I think every collector should have in their collection. So great job with the Beowulf book deck, but there is one deck that made it out even more, ahead of this one. So let's see what it is. At number 1, it is the other book deck of the year. This is Robin Hood. The legendary story is told beautifully in the deck. Before you get that, you have to open up this outstanding tuck case. Just like Beowulf is designed to look like a book, this was actually the first of his book decks. And that green and brown just look great together. The limited tuck adds even more foiled accents to amp up the feel, but either tuck looks great. I'm a big fan of this really unique interior printing, and the deck itself is truly beautiful. The greens that are captured on here and the themes are just really nicely done. It features my favorite Joker perhaps of all time, with that diptych Joker of Big John and Robin Hood fighting on the bridge. And the court cards are really nicely done. They're done in this sort of cross-stitch style, really capturing the feel of England back in the day, and gives you an insight into all of the famous characters of the Robin Hood story, including Robin himself on the King of Spades. Really beautifully done on this one. The gold foiling on this one really adds some interesting touches. If there's one knock, it's that it's not the best handling deck in the world. In fact, it's one of my least favorite handling decks. But the artwork on this overcomes that in every way to make this my favorite deck of the entire year for King's Wild Shorts. And that's really saying something, because the decks this year were great. So Robin Hood is number 1. And that does it. That is my list ranking the decks of King's Wild Shorts 2020 from number 1 all the way to number 12. And I gotta say, I am a fan of all of these decks. Just because I rank something low doesn't mean it's not a great deck and worth a look. It really is a testament to just how great of a year it was for King's Wild Project that I had such great decks ranked relatively low on the list. Really can't recommend King's Wild Shorts highly enough. It's fascinating to see the decks that he comes up with every year, and I'm a fan of all of these. But what do you think? That's my ranking. That's my 1 through 12. What's yours? Which one was your favorite deck of the year? Do you agree with me, disagree? Let me know down in the comments. All right, thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more deck reviews and unboxings and best of lists. And I'll see you for the next one.